Welcome to this video on file handling or text files. I'm going to be using pseudocode to help explain how everything works, and we're going to be aiming this at GCSE. The specification we're following will be very applicable to pretty much all exam boards. This one is for the Cambridge iGCSE. There are two main points that we need to know. So we need to understand the purpose of having data stored in a file to be used by a program. So that'll be the first thing we cover, is why we have file handling. And then the second point will be a bit more practical, opening, closing, and using files for reading and writing information. And that's where the pseudocode will come in. And they've just added a little bit more here. So good news is we only need to read and write single items of data or single lines of text. And this video will cover everything you need to know on all of these points. Now, the specification does give a bit more of a breakdown, but I don't think that's particularly clear. So I picked out what I feel are the main things, or the main pseudocode you need to remember. So we've got these 3 lines for reading information from a file. And then I've got these 3 lines for writing information to a file. So don't worry too much right now if these don't make perfect sense, because the whole point of this video is to go through these. There'll be lots of practice coming up, but if you want to pause the video, make notes of these, because we will be using these lines of code quite a bit. Okay, so let's go on and see how this all works. So file handling. So let's get the first of those points addressed. The reason why we've got this topic. So you might be asked, why do we need to store information in files? So when you're working in a newly created file, so for example, you open Notepad and you start working on a new Notepad document. If you haven't saved it to the secondary storage, it only exists in the RAM. Now, here's a question. Have a think about this. What happens to the contents of RAM when you close a program? So the contents of the RAM, if you close a particular application or a program, the program itself is removed from the RAM, but any associated files and data are also removed from the RAM as well. So if you haven't saved it permanently on the hard disk drive, the secondary storage, you've lost that information. So unsaved files are lost from RAM when you close the application. So for example, in this case, Notepad. Or if the computer is switched off as well. So as you will also know, RAM is volatile memory, which needs power to retain information, to retain data. So if you switch the power off, then again, you lose all of the data. So if we want to keep the file permanently, we need to save it to permanent storage. So for example, a hard disk drive or a solid state drive. Writing files to disk and reading files from disk is called file handling. So that's the point of this topic. So there's a couple of points on there which might be useful to make some revision notes on. But here's a visual representation of what we were just talking about. So if I switch on my computer, I can now open up Notepad and start working on my Notepad document that I've just created. There we go. Now, if I switch the computer off at that point, or if I close down the application, because I haven't saved it, that data is now gone. I don't have it anymore. So we need to use file handling. So if I switch the computer back on, I've lost that data. So we're going to use file handling now to help make a permanent copy of that. So here's my file. I'm going to use file handling to save it to my hard disk drive, my secondary storage here. I've switched off the computer and it's still there. If I switch the computer back on, I can now open my file so I can read information from it using file handling again, and I can carry on working on it. So file handling is very, very useful. So now we're going to look at the second of the 2 main points in the specification, and that's all about using the pseudocode to do this practically. So first thing we need to do is to be able to open a file. So to open a file, we can open it in 2 ways. We can open it to read information from it, and we can open it to write information to it. So the first one we've got here is open file, pseudocode. The name of the file, so it's list.txt. The .txt is really important. So in this case, it tells us we're opening a text file, and it's important in the exam that you do put that, otherwise it will cost you a mark. So open file, list.txt for read. So this opens an existing file so we can read data from it. The other way we can open a file is for writing information to it. So we say open file, it's the same again, so list.txt for the name of the file, and now for write. That specifies write mode. However, with the write mode, there is something important that we need to remember that the exam board wanted to make clear in the specifications. So what they're saying is, in write mode, this will create a new file. So if the file doesn't exist and you open a file in write mode, because we want to write data, it's going to create a brand new file, which is great. But if there was an existing file with the same name, then that existing file will be overwritten with a new file, a new blank file, and its contents are lost. So it's important that we remember that as we're going through and practicing some of these questions. It doesn't actually make any difference for any exam question or anything that we're doing, but it's just important that we need to remember that's how that works. Okay, so let's just practice what we've just looked at. So for the first two questions, you're just going to write a single line of pseudocode that will open a file, and then there's a question to think about for part C. So pause the video, have a go at the questions, press play, and see how you get on. Okay, so the first one, we want to read data from the file, so we're going to say open file. The file is called names.txt, so important we add that extension, the .txt, and we'll open it for read in read mode. Then the second one, we want to write data to it, so we're open file names.txt for write mode. And then part C, well, what happens to the file when we use the write command? So as we just talked about on the previous slide, a new file is created and the data is overwritten. So when we open the file for write mode, we're essentially overwriting the data that's there, creating a new file, which we can then write information to. So let's have a little bit more of a practice of this concept. So now reading data from a file. So if we want to read a single item of data from a file, we can write this. Read file, names.txt for name. So how this works is this read file is the pseudocode command that will allow us to read some information. Names.txt is the text file or the file that we want to read information from. So we're going to read a single item, which will be the first item in the file. And then for name, this is a variable that's going to be assigned, or it's going to store the item of data that we're going to read. So this will read the first line in the text file and assign it to the variable for name. So for name will basically be storing Fred, or be assigned Fred. But we have to open the text file first. So we have to, before we can do anything, we have to open the file first. Then we can add read file names.txt for name. So we're going to take the first item of data, we're going to assign it, or we're going to store it using the variable for name. Once we've got that variable for name, we can do things with it. So I can output for name and it will output Fred to the screen. So let's have a little bit of a practice of that. Oh, before we do that, just a quick point I wanted to make. So if you are writing pseudocode, so let's say we've got a text file called names, and we want to open it and read information from it. So open file names.txt for read. Read file names.txt, and then I've made a variable called names that's going to store the first line. This is a problem because you'll actually this won't work. You get an error message or you lose a mark in the exam because you can't use the same identifier or same name. So the text file is called names. We can't use a variable names now as well. We would need to change that. So we can't use the same identifier for a text file and a variable in the same code. So we would do something like we did on the last slide. So the text file is called names.txt, and I'm going to read the first line or the first piece of information. I'm going to store it using a variable called for name, which I can then do stuff with, output, for example. Okay, so let's have a go at task 2. So write pseudocode to read and then output the first line of data from the above file. So pause the video, have a go, press play, see how you get on. Okay, so let's have a look. So first thing we need to do is we need to open the file in the correct mode. So we're reading information. So open file, then put the name of the file, scores.txt for read. Read file, scores.txt score. So I'm using the read file pseudocode command. I'm reading from the scores.txt file, and the first piece of information in that file is going to be stored using the variable score here, and which I can then output. Okay, so hopefully that one is useful. Let's have a look at writing data to a file. So if we wish to write a single piece of data to a file, we can write this line of code here. So instead of read file, we've got write file, then the name of the text file, and then the variable that we want to that's going to be holding the piece of data that we're going to write. So new subject could be, for example, a variable that's assigned computer science as a subject. But to do it, we have to open the file first, just like we did last time. So open file, subject.txt for write. So remember, this is going to overwrite the existing file with a blank file, but that's fine. Now, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to actually ask, so we can use some pseudocode here to ask the user to enter a subject. So I'm outputting a message, enter a subject, and then I'm inputting the new subject variable, so I could type in computer science. I've declared the variable here. It's good practice to do that, so we simply write declare the name of the variable and then the data type as well. Now, the question may say you don't need to declare variables. If it doesn't, it's good practice to do that, and it's possible there might be marks in the mark scheme for actually declaring variables, but I haven't done it on all of the questions. I've done it on some of them, but if you see that popping up, then it's just good practice to do that. Okay, so now we've got this variable storing or being assigned the value that's been entered by the user. We can now write that to the file using the write file pseudocode. So write file, the name of the file we're writing to, and then the variable, which in this case might be containing the words computer science, which will be written to the text file. This will create a new text file overwriting the data in the old one. The new file will just contain the single subject entered by the user, but that's fine because that's what we were asked to do in the question. Okay, so task 3, writing data to a file. So write pseudocode to add a new name to the text file. So think about what we did last time, pause the video, have a go, and then we'll check through the answer. Okay, so we're going to open the file, names.txt for write, because we want to write information to it. Now I am asking them to enter a name. I'm using the variable name here to store, or I'm assigning what they type to the variable name. I've declared it again, and now I'm just going to write that to the text file. So write file, names.txt, which is the name of the text file, and then the variable I want to write. So the value that that variable is pointing to, it's storing, is going to be written to the text file. So I entered Fred. Fred will be written to the first line of that text file. Right, closure. So some of you may have been saying, well, hang on, what about this close command that you showed us right at the start? That's really important. So no data is committed or written to a text file until it's been closed. It's important that every time you use a text file, that close command will be the final piece of code. So close file, the name of the text file. And the great thing is it's the same whether you're reading or writing. So for example, open file scores for read. We can read a piece of information from that file. So the top piece of information will be assigned to the variable score. We can output it, but we're not done until we close the file. So close file scores.txt, and you do that every time you use a text file. That's really important. So let's do some practice of this. So task 4, and make sure you close all text files. Write some pseudocode. We're going to ask the user for their favorite fruit. So they're going to input that, and you're going to write it to the text file called fabfruit.txt. Pause the video, have a go, press play, see how you get on. Okay, so we need to open the file in write mode. So that will overwrite the existing file or create a new file called fabfruit.txt. Output a message, enter your favorite fruit, input fruit. So we've got a variable now that's going to help us store the fruit that they enter, and we're going to write that to the text file. So write file, the name of the file fabfruit.txt that we're writing to, and then this is what we're writing, the variable fruit. So whatever that's storing, if I typed in mango, mango would be written to the text file. And what do we need to do next? Absolutely correct. We need to close file fabfruit.txt. Cost you a mark if you don't do that. It comes up in the exam. Right, task 5. Again, making sure we close all files. Write some pseudocode to open the text file pets.txt, read the first line and output it. So let's go ahead and do that, or pause the video and then press play and see how you get on. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to open our file in the correct mode. So this is read mode. Open file pets.txt for read. Then we're going to read the first piece of information from that file by using read file, the name of the file, and then we've created a variable that's going to be assigned or store the first value in that file. In this one, it would be, for example, dog. So pet type is storing, the variable pet type is storing dog for us. We can output that because we're asked to do it in the question. And then to finish off, we need to make sure we close the file. So close file pets.txt. Okay, so going really well now. Now, the other thing it mentioned in the spec, which we're just going to look at for the last couple of questions, is to read or write a line of text. It works in exactly the same way. So we can see we've got it looks like a line of text, but it's essentially a single string, but it's just longer. So it works exactly the same. But what you might be expected to do is to make this single line of text. I'll show you how we can do that. So we can open file customers.txt for read. So to read a line of text, it's exactly the same. If I wanted to read this first line here, 0001 Fred 12 Tree Street, we do exactly what we've done all along. So read file is customers.txt is the text file, and I'm making a variable called details, which is going to be assigned that whole line of text as a single string. I can output that, and then I need to make sure, obviously, we close the file. What will that output? Have a little think about it. I think we talked about the answer there. So yes, it's going to output the entire first line. So details is that first line. When we read file customers.txt read file, we take that entire line of text and treats it as a single string. Let's take that idea a bit further. So writing. Okay, so you might be asked to write a line of text. Again, it works in exactly the same way as we've already done. So let's say we want to enter a name and address for the next customer. So we need to, because we're writing data, we need to open the file in write mode. So open file customers.txt, which is the name of the text file for write. So as we've said lots of times now, that's actually going to create a brand new file and it will overwrite the data that's already there. But that's fine because that's what we're expected to do here. So first thing we need to do is need to collect the data. So asking them for, what are we asking them for? Their name and address. So enter the name, so input name, enter house and street, input house and street. Okay, so we've collected the data. Now what we need to do next is we need to actually construct the line of data that we want to write back to the text file. So we need to take the individual pieces of information and put them together. And we're using the concatenate or the plus operator to do that. So I've created a new variable called line of text, and I'm assigning that 0004, which would be the next customer number, plus a space, plus name, plus another space, plus house street. Now there should be a quote mark here, so hopefully you spotted that. I'd like to say it was a deliberate mistake, but I forgot to put it in. I'll add it in after I finish the video. So, but if we put those things together, we will end up with a line of text that's stored as a single, using a single variable. We can now write that line of text to the file. So write file customers.txt line of text, just like we've already done. Don't forget to close the file as well. So if we enter Pat for name and 12 Jam Lane for the house and street, what will that write to the file using this particular pseudocode? Yes, absolutely right. I'm pretty sure I can hear you saying 0004. So we're putting that plus a space, plus the name, which is Pat, plus a space, plus 12 Jam Lane. So that will be written as a single string, as a single line to the text file. Okay, so let's have a go at task 6. Create a program in pseudocode to ask the user to type in their favorite color and store it in a text file. So pause the video, have a go at this, and then press play and see how you get on. Okay, so we're going to ask them to enter their favorite color first of all, and I'm declaring it here. Now, I haven't declared it in all of them, but I'm doing it every now and then just so you can get the idea between how we actually declare things in pseudocode. Okay, so sometimes, like I said before, the question may say you don't need to declare. If it doesn't say that, it's good practice to declare things. Okay, but let's carry on and see how we finish this question off. So we've entered the information. We're going to open the file in write mode because we want to store it in the text file. We're going to use the write file pseudocode. So write file, the name of the text file, and then the variable that was input, that's going to be written to the text file. Just a point on the name of the text file, because there isn't a name for the text file in the question, I think usually they will put a name in the question that they want you to use. It doesn't matter, because this file will be created, you can call it what you want, but it makes sense to call it something that's linked to the question. So I've called it colors. So open file colors.txt for write, that will create that file. Then we can write the variable fab color to the file, and then don't forget to close the file as well. Okay, so that's how we do that. Let's move on now, and let's add what we were doing short before we did the last question, where we're actually building a little bit more of a complex line of text. So write a pseudocode program to ask the user for their forename and surname, concatenate these, so that's using the plus operator to put them together, and write them to a text file called username. So pause the video, have a go at this one, press play, and see how. Right, so hopefully you've paused the video. Let's have a look at the solution for task 7. So first thing we need to do is we need to ask the user for their forename and surname. So let's ask them to input their forename. Let's ask them to input their surname. So I created two variables here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to put those two variables together, and I'm going to assign them to a new variable. So I'm creating a new variable called user. That's going to be assigned the forename, which have just been entered, plus a space, plus surname. So if I entered Fred Blogs, user will be assigned Fred space Blogs. So we can use that to write this piece of information to that text file. But as we did in some of the previous videos, I'm going to declare the variables that I've created. It's good practice. Sometimes the question might say you don't need to declare variables. That's fine. If it doesn't say that, it might be worth doing them. It's good practice to declare your variables. And then we just need to write user to the text file. So let's open the text file usernames.txt in write mode for write. Then we can use write file usernames.txt user. That's the variable that we're writing, so that's going to write that line of text to the text file. And what do we need to do? What's the last thing we need to do? Absolutely correct, we need to close the file. Okay, fantastic. So I think we've just got one more question left to do, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide and do that. So we have got task 8. This is the last task. So create a program in pseudocode. We're going to ask the customer to type in their forename, surname, postcode, and the house name or number. We're going to concatenate that data and store it in a text file. So we're going to write those 4 pieces of data. We're going to create a single variable that's going to hold them all. We're going to put them all together using the plus operator. And then we're going to write that to a text file. So let's go ahead and I'll pause the video, have a go at it first, and then press play and we'll see the solution. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the solution to this now. Okay, so and you can see I've actually said in the question you declare all variables as well. I've sneakily added that in. So let's collect the data first. We're inputting forename, we're inputting surname, we're inputting postcode, we're inputting the house number or name, house no name. Okay, I'm going to declare all of those as well. Good practice, they're all strings. Now all I need to do is to take fname, sname, pcode and house no name and put them together to concatenate them. So I'm going to call this record, and that's going to be assigned fname plus sname plus pcode plus house no name. I could have put spaces between each one as well. That might be good practice. I mean, it doesn't specify we have to do that in the question, but it's good practice to do that, but it doesn't matter for this question. All I need to do now is to write record to the file. So let's go ahead and do that using the pseudocode. So open file customer data.txt for write. Then we need to use the write file command. So write file customer data.txt record. So record is the variable that's holding this information. That line of information is going to be written now. So if I entered Fred Blogs 12 Oak Street, it would be F name is Fred, S name is Blogs, postcode of SP12 X24 and house number say 10. Those four pieces of information will be concatenated or put together using the variable record, and then we're writing record to the first line of the text file. And what's the last thing we need to do? Absolutely correct. We need to close the file. So listen, well done if you've made it this far in the video. If you have, I hope it's been helpful. Thank you very much for watching and good luck.